In this episode, I am speaking with Mauro Guillén, who is the author of the book Perennials, the Megatrends Creating a Postgenerational Society. This is a topic that you will really need to be paying attention to as we are in the later stages of our careers. There are some big megatrends that many companies, governments, and people are not paying attention to, but many of us will still have to deal with. This will affect our work life, our family life, and retirement. Cue the music.
Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast, brought to you by Career Pivot. This podcast is where those of us in the second half of life come together to discuss how to repurpose our careers for the 21st century. Come listen to career experts give you proven strategies. Listen to people like you tell their stories on how they repurpose their careers. And finally, get your questions answered. Your host, Mark Miller, has made 6 career pivots over the last 30 years. He understands this is not about jumping out of the frying pan into a fire, but rather to create a plan where you make clear, actionable steps or pivots to a better future career. Are you ready to repurpose your career?
Welcome to episode 334 of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. My name is Mark Miller, and I'll be your host every Monday for discussion on what it's like to repurpose your career. In this episode, I am speaking with Mauro Guillén, who is the author of the book Perennials, the Megatrends Creating a Postgenerational Society. This is a topic that you will really need to be paying attention to as we are in the later stages of our careers. There are some big megatrends that many companies, governments, and people are not paying attention to, but many of us will still have to deal with. This will affect our work life, our family life, and retirement. Let me read the author's bio. Mauro F. Guillén is one of the most original thinkers at the Wharton School, where he is a professor of management and vice dean for the MBA for Executives program. An expert on global market trends, he is a sought-after speaker and consultant. He combines his training as a sociologist at Yale and as a business economist in his native Spain to methodically identify and quantify the most promising opportunities at the intersection of demographic, economic, and technological developments. His online classes on Coursera and other platforms have attracted over 100,000 participants from around the world. He has won multiple teaching awards at Wharton, where his presentation on global market trends has become a permanent feature of over 50 executive education programs annually. He is a Wall Street Journal best-selling author of 2030, How Today's Biggest Trends Will Collide and Reshape the Future of Everything. This episode is sponsored by the Career Pivot community, but more on that later. I've been interested in generational change for years. We have a lot of generational change in our society. I think Mauro discusses in his book. He does not say how to solve it, but spells out the megatrends in an easily digestible way. Without any delay, let's get to my discussion with Mauro Guillén. Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast. I have the real joy of having Mauro Guillén on the podcast, and he is the author of the Perennials, the Megatrends Creating a Post-Generational Society. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Mark, for having me.
Firstly, let's talk about what the heck is a perennial?
Well, a perennial is somebody who doesn't think or act his or her age. So it's somebody who works or learns or enjoys life according to his or her preferences and capabilities, regardless of what the age is. So they're not constrained by the age. They're not driven by age, but rather by what they want to do by lifestyle.
And I like that because I fit into that model. First, why did you write the book, and why did you write it now? What was about the timing?
Yeah, so, in the middle of the pandemic, I was doing a lot of webcasts and presentations online for different groups of people. And one day I was making a presentation, and the audience was directors of zoos and aquariums in the United States and in other countries around the world. And they were telling me about the challenges that they're facing. And the biggest challenge that they're facing, as you probably know, is declining number of visitors. So they have children going and they have maybe grandparents going, but nobody in the middle, right? And it seemed to me that, revisiting the concept of generations, revisiting the concept of what is it that we do at different points in life would be interesting to do. In other words, that there's no need really to do exactly what we're supposed to do at each age, but rather that we can be perennials. So that's where the idea for the book came from.
I had actually an Applewhite on the podcast several years ago, and one of the things she talks about that you discuss in here is we tend to age segregate in our societies, whether it's going through school, all through our lives, and that, puts it bluntly, gets us in trouble.
Oh, absolutely, because it has proven to be a system that is very inflexible, is very compartmentalized, and doesn't allow us to express our creativity and to do whatever we think we can do at different points in life, as opposed to having to just follow that all of those assumptions as to what is age appropriate. So it is something that emerged, as you correctly point out, more than 100 years ago when we introduced universal schooling and then also state pensions. And that essentially divided our lives into 4 different stages. First we play, then we learn, then we work, and finally we retire. And that's too inflexible.
So that was going to be my next question, is what were the 4 stations of life? It's interesting. Most of the time it's we grow up, we work, we retire. But you have a whole section in here on lifespan versus health span. We are living longer, but I liked how you kind of broke it down between lifespan and health span.
Oh, absolutely. I think we are too obsessed with how much, how long we will live, as opposed to how many years of, being in good mental and physical health we will be. And that's what really matters. What really matters is, can we continue to pursue an active lifestyle throughout most of our lives? So for Americans, on average, the last 7 years of our life is not in good health. So we're limited. So we should be focusing on how can we expand what I call the health span, as opposed to how we can increase life expectancy in general.
Yeah, because it's interesting. I live in outside of Guadalajara, Mexico, and there's a large expat community here. And there are any number of folks here who are in their 70s and even into their 80s who are still incredibly active. I know with my parents, that wasn't true.
Oh, absolutely. I remember my father, when my father was my age now, I'm 58, he wasn't in the same kind of physical shape. He was mentally quite fine, but physical shape, I'm much better, much better shape than he was at my age. No question about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 67 now, and I'm in the best health of my adult life. You have a whole chapter on the rise and fall of the nuclear family, which I find interesting because I thought the nuclear family was supposed to go forward, but I said I live here in Mexico where there are lots and lots of multi-generational families. So what's going to happen with the quote, well, what is the nuclear family, and then what's going to happen to it?
Well, the nuclear family is this arrangement that became the norm in the United States and many other countries after World War II. And it was comprised of 2 parents married to each other and 1 or more children, 1 dog, maybe 1 cat, 1 refrigerator, 1 washing machine, 1 car. And that was it, right? And, in the 1970s, when Nixon was in the White House, about 40% of all American households were nuclear families, 40%. But nowadays, as we speak, Mark, it's only 18%. It's down from 40% to 18%. Because now we have more people living alone. We have more divorced people. And of course, we also have more people who, are partnering together, but not necessarily married.
Yeah, the concept of how we live is changing pretty dramatically. And the fact that when and how we get married, what is that going to cause? How does that affect society and our lives?
Well, I think this is a reflection of the reality, or a reality in which, people are making decisions that are not the traditional decisions. So, for example, a lot of people are making the decision not to have children. A lot of people are making the decision not to live with somebody else, but rather to live alone. And then, of course, we have a lot of people who get married and then they separate, they divorce. So it's not a matter of saying, oh, the good old days of the nuclear family. It's like people are making their decisions. And, that's the outcome in the end. I think, though, this has major implications for all sorts of things, right? Because once again, the dominant type of household in the United States is no longer this nuclear family as it was in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s.
It's interesting. Your fourth chapter is Rebels Without a Cause, which is about the rise of the teenager. And most people don't realize that if you go back 100 years ago, the concept of teenager didn't exist. Why is that?
Well, I think, teenage is obviously one of those very difficult transitions in life. But it is a very difficult transition in life because I think we have made it so, not because naturally it should be. Because, as you know, especially in the United States, we put a lot of pressure on teenagers to make up their minds. We put a lot of pressure so that they decide, so what do you want to be in life? And we tell them that they better make a good decision because they're going to have to stick with it for the next 30 or 40 years until they retire. But you see, now, Mark, things have changed. The economy is in flux. Technology changes all the time. So you cannot make decisions about what you want to be for the next 50 years, because within 10 years, you're going to be obsolete, right? Yeah. So I think if we rethink the way we approach teenagehood, then we can release some of the pressure and we can tell teenagers, look, you don't have to make a fateful lifelong decision when you're 16 or 18 as to what you want to be. Just make the decision for the next 10 years, because you see, things are going to change so much within the next 10 years that it would be foolish for you to make a decision for the next 50 years. You yourself, Mark, you've switched careers multiple times, right? But so far, people like yourself have been the exception. I think moving forward, people like yourself are going to be the norm. Again, because the economy and technological change is essentially producing a very different situation where we need to be more flexible and we need to reinvent ourselves several times.
Yeah, when I read that, I went off and taught high school math in an inner city high school in my 40s. And the one thing that really hit me was 18-year-olds, particularly 18-year-old boys, are really stupid.
Yeah.
They may be very intellectual, but they don't know what they don't know.
Absolutely. Women, teenage women tend to make much better decisions.
Yes.
As you know, right now, there are more women in college in the United States than men. Women also drop out of high school much less than men do. And in general, they're more future-oriented. They think more about the future. But once again, I think both men and women in the United States and in so many other countries around the world will need to adjust to this new situation. And for me, the most important message to them is, don't think that you need to make a decision for the rest of your life. Make a decision for the next 10 or 15 years, and then we'll see what happens, because the world is going to be very different in 10 or 15 years due to technological change and due to economic change.
On top of that, as you say, you're going to have to make career changes just because everything changes so damn fast these days. And so you have a chapter on 3 careers in a lifetime. Actually, I think it's going to be a lot more than that.
Yeah, probably. I was being conservative.
So how will this affect retirement? You've got a whole chapter on reimagining retirement.
Well, retirement, I think, is also one of those things that have been oversold. Because as you know, people who go into retirement, they experience withdrawal syndrome. They experience buyer's remorse. They get bored. They feel lonely because suddenly they get cut off from their social networks. And I think we should evolve towards a more flexible arrangement where people who go into retirement can also work, maybe part-time, maybe from home, where they can find other formulas so that they can make a little bit of money, sure, but also continue to be socially connected. But I think the whole issue about switching careers is also very relevant, because I think a lot of people, as they approach age 50 or age 60, they think, oh my gosh, I wish I were retired, because they're tired of working in the same occupation for 30 or 40 years. But if they were given the opportunity to switch careers, to retrain themselves, then maybe they wouldn't think about retirement as the absolute goal in their lives. They would prefer to actually keep on working. So I think this, trend towards career switching is also going to be telling people, well, as long as I'm physically and mentally okay, I'd rather keep on working at least part-time So I think all of those trends are interrelated, but what we're going to see is more people like you in the future. We need to clone you, Mark.
Well, the previous episode to this one was about, I belong to a group called Encore Network. Mm-hmm. And I was asked to talk about a number of folks in my online community who have made switches in the last 6 months. And it's interesting, the employment market now has reached a point where companies are actually willing to do that. They're willing to hire older workers, and possibly in things that they haven't done before or different than what they've done before, because they need people.
Yeah. Look, according to the U.S. Bureau of the Census, over the last 20 years, since the year 2001, nearly all employment growth in the United States has been of people above the age of 60. So there's been this great transformation, I think, at companies that they continue to retain and now to hire workers above the age of 50 or 60. And that is very good because people of that age, they do have a lot of experience. They may have less cognitive abilities than younger people, but they have more experience. And in forcing them out of the labor market, I think we're missing out on that very, very useful experience that they have.
This episode is sponsored by the Career Pivot membership community. The Career Pivot membership community is a group of people from all over the U.S. and Canada with diverse backgrounds. This is a community where everyone is there to help everyone else out figure out what they want to do in the second half of life and then make it happen. Many have made changes that they did not know existed or was possible when they came to the community. They learn from each other and broaden their horizons on what was really possible. Let's hear what Sarah had to say about being part of the community.
So, for example, when I was first exploring the idea of moving into higher ed and I was scheduling informational interviews or just networking meetings with people, I decided it would be helpful to have business cards. I was sort of struggling with how to, what kind of verbiage I should use. And it seemed like I needed 2 different ones and whatever. And I was able to post what I was thinking, my sort of designs on the community website, and people were gracious enough to give me really helpful feedback. So those kinds of things were really helpful and just sort of kept me moving along. Like, I feel like if I wasn't in the community, I could easily have stalled out at many different points along the way. And so it sort of kept my momentum going and kept me hopeful.
You can't just join the community. I bring people into the community every few months in groups. You can sign up for the waiting list, so when I open the door for new members, you'll be notified. If you're interested in learning more about the endeavor and sign up for the waiting list, please go to careerpivot.com/community. Now, back to the episode. Well, it goes back to, I had Chris Farrell on this podcast a couple of years ago, and he wrote in his book on retirement that at some point, the companies would have to start hiring older workers because there wouldn't be anybody else to hire.
Exactly right, because due to the decline in fertility, the younger age cohorts are becoming smaller and smaller. And I think, once again, companies are starting to realize this. And what we need to do is, as you said at the beginning, is stop discriminating by age. Stop attributing people's preferences and desires and capabilities to age and age alone. It's a very normal human tendency, right? The moment we see somebody, we're always trying to figure out what is his or her age, right? We're always trying to do that. It's a human tendency that we have. And you see, age should be, to a very large extent, irrelevant, right? What should be relevant is, what is your ability? What is your drive? What are your desires to do at whatever stage in life you happen to be in?
Yeah, but the problem is you used the S word, should. Because even Chris said in his book, until companies change their HR policies, mm-hmm. that there are a lot of discrimination just built into the systems. And it's interesting, of the number of people who have made switches in my group, it's all come through relationships. It hasn't come from getting on a job board and submitting applications, and it's always been very relationship based.
Yeah, Absolutely. Absolutely. And once again, I think as human beings, we need to be very social. And if people don't switch careers, if people don't continue working, I think we're missing out on that social potential that we all have as human beings.
One of the things I see is there are a lot of people who retire, and then I joke they fail at retirement.
Yeah. Yeah.
They either go back to work,
Yeah.
or they end up drinking and doing all kinds of other things that are a lot of other unhealthy lifestyle.
Yeah, most with the extra time, most retirees, what they do is they watch more TV. That's what the research indicates. And as you correctly pointed out, of Americans who have retired, about 42% go back to work, at least part-time. And of early retirees is 52% who go back to work at least part-time. So there's a lot of buyer's remorse. There's no question about it.
It's interesting because retirement is a relatively new concept.
Mm-hmm.
I always talk about the fact that on January 1, 1960, there was a great visionary, Del Webb,
Mm-hmm.
and he opened his first Sun City on January 1 of 1960 with 5 model homes and a strip mall in Sun City, Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
He had 10,000 cars outside his door coming in the first day.
Yeah.
And I used to say, well, how many of those people smoked? Probably most of them.
Yeah.
They didn't live that. They didn't live all that long. And so
it is look, I think some people certainly deserve to be able to rest. And a lot of people want to spend more time with family and grandchildren after working very hard for a long time. So I'm not saying that we should mandate that people continue working. I think we should give people a choice. But giving people a choice also means giving people an opportunity for those who prefer to continue working. And that's not what we're not doing. That's not what we're doing right now.
Well, it's, one of the things I've seen is people work at things that they don't have a passion for. And they reach a point where they say, I don't want to do this anymore.
Well, because they've been told you work for 30 or 40 years and then you retire. Your goal should be to retire. In other words, you work and you're dreaming about retirement. And that's the wrong approach. You should work on something that you like. Your job should be something that you like, that you're passionate about, that you should find enjoyable. And but we've been approaching the whole thing in a different way, especially in the United States, by telling people, you should aspire to a golden retirement in Florida or someplace, right? And so a lot of people then what they do is they work so that they can retire. And I think people should be working and try to get satisfaction from that work.
As we move to this perennial society, how does that affect the consumer market?
Well, the consumer market has also been driven, as you know, primarily by age for too long. Marketers and advertisers have been assuming that young consumers are the lead users, meaning the trendsetters, the innovators, the pioneers when it comes to new consumption. And that may have made some sense, some time ago when younger age cohorts were the most numerous. But now we're going to be very quickly in the United States and other countries around the world in a very different situation in which most consumers are going to be above the age of 50 or above the age of 60. And not only that, they do have purchasing power. And therefore, brands that don't adapt to this new situation, they're going to see that they're going to be missing out on the majority of the market. You see, most advertising that you see on TV or social media is targeting younger consumers, people in their 20s, their 30s, and their 40s. That's what happens, for example, with automobile commercials. But, in the United States, more than half of automobile sales purchases are made by people above the age of 55. Yeah. So there's a mismatch there. And in the United States also, more than 60% of people working in marketing and advertising are above the age of 45. Below the age of 45. So you also have this huge mismatch over there.
Well, when I read that section particularly about the cars, it reminded me back around 2003, I bought a Honda Element, mm-hmm. which was just a box on wheels. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I liked it was the fact that I could stand up 2 bicycles in the back and didn't have to take the wheels off.
That's right.
And they marketed it to young people.
Yeah.
But who bought it was people my age.
Yeah, who needed to take the bikes here or there, right? So yeah, I mean, this has become, quite frankly, to tell you the truth, a disease among American brands. They assume that they should be targeting young consumers, and they do so in such a way that they're actually excluding people above the age of, let's say, 50 or 60. It's a big mistake, and brands that don't start changing right now, they're going to have a lot of problems in the future.
Well, in fact, I was having this discussion in our Slack group on the Encore Career Network about the fact that 2029, every baby boomer in the U.S. will be Medicare eligible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? So what happens to the private health insurance market after 2029? Because there was a huge fall off starting in 1965, the birth rates.
Yeah. Well, we're going to see a lot of changes because of these shifting demographic trends. And that's one of them. And also think about how, we talked about how the labor market is going to change, how the consumer markets are going to change. I think we also need to worry a little bit about intergenerational conflict, because the younger people will have to pay taxes to cover all of those Medicare costs and pensions.
Yes.
So we're also going to have to work on intergenerational collaboration as opposed to conflict or friction. And I don't think we're doing enough of that.
No, I used to run a multi-generational workshop, mostly for associations. And what most people didn't understand, particularly leaders, is we all have to adapt to one another. Mm-hmm. Rather than having you adapt to me, I have to adapt to you. Mm-hmm. And we all have to do that, particularly in our communications. Yeah, it was interesting. I did my workshop for a bunch of staffing agencies, and I showed up the day before, and I noticed that they were all these folks who are in their 50s were texting. So I was asking, who are you texting? Oh, my kids. So one of the things I talked about the next day, I said, okay, how many guys are baby boomers? And most of the hands went up. I said, so how many of you text your kids? Hands went up. I said, okay, you've modified your communication style for your children. Are you willing to do that for your younger employees?
Yep.
And they all went, crap, he's right.
Absolutely. I mean, companies have been reluctant to spend money on the training of older employees. And once again, it's a big mistake.
So this has been a great conversation. I think we are in for some big changes over the next 10 years. Mm-hmm. If someone wanted to, number one, reach out and contact you, or wanted to order your book, how might they do that?
Well, in terms of contacting me, I would encourage them to go onto LinkedIn, and they can get connected to me, and then we can exchange messages. And I would really welcome their opinions on all of these topics. And then in terms of the book, you can buy it online, or you can go to your local bookstore and pre-order it. The book will be out on the 24th of August, but it's probably a good idea to pre-order it.
Well, this podcast episode will publish on August 21st. So, okay. So wonderful. or as I say, and you said go to a bookstore?
Or go online.
What's a bookstore?
Look, actually, the number of independent bookstores in the United States is growing, which is surprising. But people like, to browse. People like the community around the bookstore. So Amazon is, of course, really, really powerful. But we have this, comeback of the independent bookstore in the United States, which is, I think, is a very good trend.
Well, Mauro, thank you very much for being on the Repurpose Your Career podcast.
Thank you so much, Mark, for inviting me. It's been an honor.
This is a good read that will help you understand the trends that may slap us in the head in the next 10, 20, or 30 years. Take a moment, go to careerpivot.com, sign up for the weekly Career Pivot Insights newsletter, which is sent out every Sunday. You will get a weekly update on this podcast, white papers, and new blog posts. When you subscribe, you will receive my latest white paper, Ageism, the Last Acceptable Bias. While there, do not forget to check out the Career Pivot community, which can be found at careerpivot.com. repurposeyourcareer.com/community. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. You will find all the show notes at careerpivot.com/episode-334. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Podbeam, Overcast, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, and lots of other places where podcasts can be found. In fact, this podcast can be found on the Repurpose Your Career podcast channel on YouTube. Hope to see you next Monday for another episode of Repurpose Your Career podcast.